Dr. Vincent Pedre. I'm so happy to be with you this evening, talking all things gut, and who better than you? You have a book called The Happy Gut, and we were joking before that you appear to have your 10,000 hours of mastery in the gut itself. And I believe that is in part due to your own struggles with gut health. Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah,
awesome.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear that story, and I'd love to hear how you ended up here and why you think the gut is so important.
Awesome. I grew up with a very sensitive stomach and a lot of gut issues that over time I can look back and reinterpret, because back then you just thought that I had a sensitive stomach, and I just thought that I was, that was kind of like my Achilles heel. That's how I was designed. I didn't think that I could be normal. And part of the reason that all that happened is because I was put on multiple courses of antibiotics. As a child, pediatricians taking care of sinus infections, throat infections, pneumonia, bronchitis, and every time you had that, they would throw an antibiotic at you. So during my teenage years, I was probably on 2 or 3 or even maybe 4 rounds of antibiotics in a given year, every single year throughout my teenage years.
Wow.
While eating a diet that was very inflammatory for the gut. So my 2 main food groups were wheat, which has gluten, and dairy. And those became my 2 strongest food sensitivities, problematic foods. So if I look back and reinterpret what happened, I was put on multiple courses of antibiotics. I was a teenager. I was under a lot of stress in high school, all things that affect the permeability of the gut. So they increased the permeability of my gut lining, caused leaky gut syndrome. I became sensitive. I developed reactions to foods, and I wasn't absorbing my nutrients properly because I couldn't gain weight. So I actually went from being a very chubby young kid to losing all of the fat when I went through my growth spurt, and then I never could put on muscle, and I wasn't absorbing. My gut was getting sicker as the years went on. And it was until I went to medical school I kind of accidentally discovered that dairy was a problem for me. Up to that point, the doctors were telling my parents, "Oh, put him on a multivitamin, his immune system is weak, he needs to eat more, he's not eating enough." And I was eating, probably like 3,000 calories a day, between cereals, milk, milkshakes, ice cream, all sorts of pastries and bread. And so there was no calorie deficiency in my diet, but I wasn't absorbing the nutrients properly because I had developed leaky gut. And it wasn't a vitamin deficiency that was making me so prone to getting sick. It was a gut that was fighting a constant battle. So my immune system was distracted and couldn't pay attention to other invaders coming in, like viruses and whatnot. So when I went to medical school, I just accidentally cut out dairy because it just didn't quite fit into my schedule to sit down and eat cereal with milk in the morning. And then I stopped having other dairy as much, and I noticed that I wasn't getting sick as often. So that was the first connection I made as I was studying medicine, that there's gotta be a connection between food and our health and what's happening. I didn't quite make the connection with my gut health at the time. It took much longer for that because we still, at that point, this was the mid-90s, knowing and understanding that gluten was problematic for the gut. And what we know now about gluten, that it actually increases gut permeability through a mechanism where it causes the release of a messenger called zonulin that basically controls the permeability of the gut as if it was a dimmer switch. So the cells of the gut, they all link together, and they have these things called tight junctions between them, and they kind of link up like Velcro. But when zonulin is released, so say in response to gluten, for example, it could be other things. It could be there's an imbalance created by antibiotics, by stress, by pesticides, even by over-the-counter medications like ibuprofen. So when it's released, what happens is the Velcro loosens a bit. And thus, then there's more space between the cells that line the inside of the intestine, which is only one cell layer thick. So you have a very, very narrow barrier between your inside world and the outside world that lives inside you. And thus then there's this exposure to all sorts of food proteins that maybe are not completely digested. So looking back at what happened with me between the antibiotics, the stress of school, the leaky gut syndrome, I became dairy and gluten sensitive. And the crazy thing is that there wasn't one symptom that was telling me that I was gluten sensitive. Maybe I felt bad on some days, my stomach was upset, but it was such a regular thing that I just thought it was my normal. It wasn't until many years later, I was already an MD and had done my training in the hospital. And I mean, shocking as it may seem, because doctors really don't get any nutrition training. The nutrition training that I've gotten has been either self-taught or sought through other educational means like the Institute for Functional Medicine. They would serve pizza for lunch for us when they were sponsoring lunch and complement that with a soda, so, and that was like the worst food you could be eating. There wasn't a consciousness around that. So when I discovered functional medicine after my training and started learning about gluten and started thinking, so the stories is even deeper because, I look at my gut issues as a gift. Because my gut sensitivity is like being a canary in the coal mine. I know if something is wrong for me, but back then I didn't understand that, so I kept eating the things that were bad for me because I just thought this is how my body is, this is my normal. So when I learned that, and I learned the connection between gluten, celiac disease, and autoimmune disease, which also exists in my family, I was starting to worry, am I going to be susceptible to an autoimmune disease because of the weakness in my gut? So I revamped my diet and I took gluten out. That was over 10 years ago now. And my gut health improved dramatically, rebalancing the microbiome and eating a lot of pro and prebiotic rich foods. What I thought was my normal was not normal. And now I have what I would say is a more normal gut. I still have a sensitive gut, which I think at that level, it's our intuitive place. It's where we sense the world. And I call it a gift because it's part of what I use as being a doctor in the art of medicine and connecting with people and really listening to our intuition. I mean, there's no surprise that they call it gut instinct because there's this communication between the gut and the brain. And we sense things here, we sense things also through our heart. Not everything is being sensed through the brain, even though we think that that is the center of everything, but it isn't.
Wow, what a story. And so I'm guessing that you've never been diagnosed as celiac, is that right?
I wasn't, no, and I've tested.
And you're still not?
And I don't have celiac, so what I would classify as is what they call non-celiac gluten sensitive. And even within that, I think that there's a spectrum. So had I continued eating gluten, considering that there is autoimmune disease in my family, my risk of developing that is higher. And I think it's something that doesn't have to necessarily, when I was in medical school over 20 years ago, celiac disease was something that you diagnosed in pediatrics, you were born with. Since I've been in practice, my oldest patient so far that I diagnosed with celiac was 52 years old when I diagnosed her. So my theory is that it's something that can evolve over time. You have the susceptibility, it's the environmental factor, it's the exposures that then determine whether you develop a disease or not. So the genetics don't always predetermine everything. It's the epigenetics. It's what you do, your exposures, and especially with what you eat on a daily basis. So I looked at my sensitivity to gluten. Actually, when I first took gluten out, I really wanted to see if maybe I could bring it back one day, because who doesn't love, I mean, for me it would be like French toast or something, or like a pastry or something. And I did test it at 3 months and 6 months, and each time I had a skin reaction. And when people take a food out and retest it, you can get any sort of reaction, and sometimes it's a reaction that never happened before, because when you're eating the food constantly, your immune system is under constant attack. It doesn't know what to make of it. It's just constantly trying to deal with it. When you remove the food and then suddenly you reintroduce it, you get a very recognizable response, let's say, from your immune system. And it could be anywhere between having mental fog to breaking out in hives to a rash. When I reintroduced gluten, I got itchy on my skin. And it happened more than once, so I was, being scientific. Okay, this is strange because it happened within minutes of eating some bread. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to remove it again for several months, and then I'll test again. Same thing happened. And that was just my confirmation. One thing that I teach patients is their own intuitive intelligence. And part of being intuitive with your body is to be in touch with your body and to listen to your body and to be aware of what's happening and to make the connections. Like, you just ate this food and minutes later, 30 minutes later, you're feeling this way. So let's look at these patterns. So after that happened the second time, I decided, I was feeling so good off of gluten, and I was feeling so much more mentally sharp than I had in years, that it wasn't so much of a sacrifice anymore to completely alter my diet and just kind of look at other ways that I could rebalance whatever nutrients I might be missing from having wheat.
I love that you've mentioned this, because a lot of people that have gut issues might go to the doctor and they'll be tested for celiac and they'll come back negative, and they'll think, oh, so I don't have an issue with gluten, they'll continue to eat it. No. That was actually the case for me. I had a feeling that my body wasn't agreeing with gluten, and I'd feel tired, but I'm like, oh, who cares, I'll just sleep a bit longer. I don't mind having a big bowl of pasta, it makes me go to sleep anyway after dinner. It wasn't the worst thing in the world, but then
But you don't know what's happening inside.
Exactly.
Because the fact that it's making you go to sleep is probably because it's contributing to leaky gut. And when you have a leaky gut, the next thing that happens is you have translocation of toxins from the intestine into your bloodstream. And one of the most potent or the most significant things that get translocated is lipopolysaccharide. Another name for it is endotoxin. And that comes from gram-negative bacteria that live primarily in the large intestine. So as they die, this is on the outer coating, so the outer wall of the bacteria has these lipopolysaccharide endotoxin molecules, and they get released. Well, if your gut lining is healthy, it's going to stay inside the gut lumen. It's not going to come into your bloodstream. But if you have leaky gut, it's just basically the floodgates are open and everything comes in. What you experience is mental fog, fatigue, maybe achiness, muscle aches. And this is all signs that you have leaky gut syndrome, especially if it happens right after you eat, because we know that every time we eat, there's a certain element of what we call endotoxemia. And this is related, this to me is really significant discovery, because there are receptors for endotoxin in the liver, in muscle tissue, in brain tissue, in the hypothalamus, in the brain. And all of those receptors turn on pathways that tell the body, let's produce inflammation. Let's turn on all the inflammatory signals. It's like getting out the fire department, but they're spinning out fire instead of putting out fire, because that's what your immune system does when it's triggered to create inflammation. So it's, yeah. So going back to what you said, it's not black and white that you have celiac and you're gluten sensitive, or you don't have celiac. I mean, and that goes for almost every disease. We live in a spectrum. I have celiac patients who can't have even a tiny bit of contamination, and that sets them off, flares them up for several days. There are celiac patients who could tolerate that small amount. So everybody's in a different spectrum. And between celiac and normal, there's non-celiac gluten sensitive, and that's probably a big portion of the population. I mean, they calculate that it's 10% of the population that has non-gluten celiac, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. But I honestly think that that number is growing. And I think part of the problem is because of the alteration in wheat that started here in the United States with the dwarf wheat, which has been hybridized and produces more gluten than it used to. So some of my patients, for example, when they go that are gluten sensitive and they travel to other countries like in Europe, France, they're using a different wheat over there that doesn't have as much gluten. They tell me, well, I didn't feel sick over there. Why do I feel sick when I eat here in the US? And it's really, the food is different. So you have to look at the food itself. But even with that, I think there is an evolution, or there's been this big rise of gastrointestinal disease. And I think part of it is our food, part of it is the incredible stress that we live under in modern society. Part of it is the overprescribing of antibiotics. So every time you get an antibiotic, it causes a complete disruption in your gut microbiome. We haven't even started talking about that. But we need, we are symbiotic organisms. And if you think about this, there are two things that are just amazing. We inherit our mitochondria from our mothers through the egg, right? And that has come through history from the first woman, whichever way you could trace it back. So there's a piece of us that it actually comes through the divine feminine, and that is the energy centers inside every cell, the mitochondria. But we also inherit from our ancestors their microbiome, so it's passed on generation to generation, but it's also controlled by what we eat. So depending on your diet, that's going to determine whether your microbiome is very narrow and not very diverse, or it is really diverse. There was a really interesting study I saw that was done on the Hadza people of Tanzania, who are still about, I think they number around 1,200, and a couple hundred of them still follow more traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle. So they eat a lot of tubers. They eat anywhere between medium to larger game animals that they hunt, but it's not, not regular. And interestingly, part of the year they eat honey. And they did a study where they looked at the diversity of their gut microbiome compared to a control group, and the control group was a group of healthy Italians. And the interesting thing is that with their diets, the Hadza people were eating tubers, which are extremely high in fiber. And that fiber is food for the microbiome. That's a prebiotic. So then it helps create diversity in the microbiome. So the people of Tanzania, the Hadza people, the hunter-gatherers, had a more diverse microbiome than their comparative group, which was Italians eating pasta and whatnot. So the Western diet maybe has become very devoid of fiber, and that is affecting the microbiome. Now throw in antibiotics, and that is also affecting the diversity of the microbiome. And I think when we look at, why are we seeing so much gut disease? These are the reasons why. And why is the gut or the digestive system so important? It's because to me, I liken it to the roots of the body. So if you look at a plant is grounded by its roots, and through the root system is where the plant absorbs all of the nutrients. So if the leaves of the plant are sick, you're not going to treat the leaves. You're going to go and look at the roots and see, well, what's happening at the roots? Is it getting all the minerals that it needs? Why is the plant sick? So the same way, if the body is sick, we need to look at the root. And our root system is the digestive system.
Brilliant. So how do we go about looking at the roots, our digestive system? What's the solution to this epidemic that's happening at the moment in terms of unhealthy guts?
Oh, geez.
Take it
where do we start? Where do we start? The first level of the solution is awareness. So many people, since I wrote my book, Happy Gut, have emailed and said, I thought this was just the way my life was going to be, or my normal, or no doctor could figure it out. And just giving them the information that what you've been doing was not quite the right thing to heal your gut, but this is the way to do it. I think that's number one, is increasing awareness, and this is what we're doing here. So helping people understand the importance of the foundation of their gut. So again, it's the roots of the body. So it is your foundation for strengthening every other part of your body. But secondly, so how do we learn about what's going on inside the gut? We can do all sorts of different tests. And the way I describe testing is because there's no perfect test. I think we like to kind of, what is the word I'm looking for? We like to make things feel like, this one test has all the answers, but it's not like that. To me, tests are like tiny little windows looking into the body, but when you look through that window, you can't see the entire person. So they're pieces of information that add up to create a puzzle that we put together to figure out what's going on with the person. And they can be helpful or they could be misleading. But someone who's been sick with gut issues for a long time, a lot of times the testing, whether it's a stool analysis, sometimes you can actually test for things related to the gut through a urine analysis, which sounds crazy, but there are metabolites from organisms like, say, yeast, that might be populating and taking over the gut that would be detected in the urine. And it's easier to detect that in the urine than to detect it in a stool study. So we can do stool analysis, we can do urine analysis, and really seeing a skilled professional who really understands the language of the gut. I think that that's important, but there's so much that can be done just by even just starting with an elimination diet and cleaning out the more inflammatory foods in the diet. So then you ask, well, what can we do? Taking out pesticide-ridden foods from the diet, trying to eat organic or from the farmer's market as much as possible. Depending on the budget, there are certain things that are safer to buy that are non-organic, and anything that has a very thin skin, you definitely want to buy organic. Lettuces anything from the soil, you probably want to buy organic if possible, because those pesticides are antimicrobials. They kill bacteria and they affect the microbiome. Not buying or eating GMO foods, because that encourages an industry that sprays so much pesticide over the crop. I mean, they know that on a genetically modified corn or soy field, the farmer will spray 6 times the amount of pesticide he would have otherwise sprayed, because the crop is made to be resistant to the pesticide. So they say, well, we can put in even more. And what that's causing is a complete loss of diversity in our crop, but also in the soil. Beautiful thing that I met Maria Rodale, who's the granddaughter of the person who's considered the founder of the organic movement in the United States. And she said the soil is like the guts of the earth. And if you think about that, well, our gut is a symbiotic system with all these microorganisms, bacteria, maybe up to 100 trillion in there, but a diversity of species anywhere between 400, 700, maybe even up to 1,000 depending on the person. And to think that looking at the earth and the soil is the guts of the planet, and we need to take care of that. So, you ask me, well, how do we take care of our guts? We take care of it by making the right food choices and by showing through our purchasing dollars that we're not going to buy things that are damaging to the earth and to ourselves, because it goes hand in hand. And the increasing awareness about, what is the root of the matter? Where are these issues coming from? People are eating too much sugar. People are eating too many refined carbohydrates. And all these things create loss of diversity. Fast food, preserved foods, packaged foods with too many ingredients. All of this affects the diversity of the gut microbiome or skews it in a certain direction. So we want to have a balanced diet. I tell patients that they should be eating the rainbow of vegetables, and it should be a plant-centered diet, because we need all those fibers from plants to be able to create diversity in our own gut microbiome. And we know, why is diversity such an important word when we talk about gut? It's because diversity is the key to health. The more diverse your gut microbiome, it's really interesting, because diversity also means that you might have some bad guys hanging out with the good guys. It's just you have more of the good guys. But it's almost like you need that balance of everything. And a lot of the patients I see with gut disorders, what happens is they've lost a lot of the good guys, and then it's created an opening for more predatory pathogens, bacteria, yeast, or even parasites to kind of take over the gut. And then they're suffering, but they don't know why. So it's a complete revamp.
I would love to hear some stories from people, even people that have come in. Obviously, you're becoming known as a guy that, a doctor,
a gut
that's
expert.
Great. Yeah, gut expert. So I'm
expert.
assuming a lot of people coming to you directly for gut issues. But I want to hear some stories of people coming in. They might have had depression, anxiety. They might have had, acne or something.
Yes.
And you've been like, oh, actually, let's fix your gut.
Yeah.
Tell me, I'm sure you've had plenty of stories.
I've had plenty of patients like that, and what I say, those are gut-associated symptoms. And you don't have to have any symptoms in your gut to have a gut-associated condition. So one of my great examples is, actually, I'll give you 2 examples. One was a patient early on in my career. She had been to about 5 different dermatologists. She was breaking out in hives. No one could figure out where the hives were coming from. So, and I'm thinking, okay, why are you here to see me? Now, this is a lot of pressure. I have to figure out why you have hives. And you've been to the top dermatologists in New York City, and they haven't been able to figure this out. So how am I, I was early on in my career in getting into the gut, and I'm like, okay, let me just break it down. And she was of Irish descent. And I know that a lot of people coming from Ireland, where wheat was not part of their ancestral diet, can have issues with wheat. And I tested her for celiac markers, genetics, and she was positive, I think, on at least one. And I told her, you know what, let's do an experiment. She was eating a lot of wheat-based stuff, bread, pasta. And so she was very kind of like, what? I need to change my diet. So I said, you know what, let's not think of this forever. Let's just do this for the next 4 weeks. And you'll come back and meet with me in 4 weeks. These are all the foods that I want you to avoid. These are the substitutions you can have. So she comes back 4 weeks later, and her hives are diminished like 75%. And nothing had done that. So she was quite pleased, and I said, well, do you think, why don't we continue this for another 4 weeks? Let's see where we get. Knowing that I probably would have to tell her, you know what, you're going to have to avoid wheat going forward. But we avoided it for another 4 weeks, and the hives completely disappeared. Western medicine would have treated this as a skin issue and let me give you steroid cream, or maybe let me put you on rounds of oral steroids, or let me look for other allergens. A lot of times when you look for allergic reactions to wheat gluten, you might not find them. And the reason is the body has multiple ways that it can react to foods. So really, in the end, the gold standard of figuring out whether you react to a food or not is to just do an elimination of the food. Now, sometimes it can be as simple as you take that one food out and you see this dramatic result. But other times, you might have multiple foods that you might be reactive to, and you have to take all of them out in order to see the results. So maybe I have someone, well, I tried gluten-free and I didn't feel better, but they didn't do dairy-free at the same time. So it might be like the analogy is, if you're sitting on thumbtacks and you remove one, do you have less pain? No. You still have another tack that you're sitting on. So if you have more than one food that is causing inflammation and a problem for your digestive system or for your body, because sometimes there are people who don't feel it here. It was, for this patient, it was hives. You have to remove all of them together. So sometimes you have to do kind of a broad elimination diet. But that's one example of a patient that came in and had no gut symptoms whatsoever. The interesting thing, though, is sometimes working with these patients that don't have gut symptoms, when you improve the diet and you start resolving their symptoms that are, what I call the gut-associated symptoms, a lot of times they'll come in and tell me, you know what, I didn't realize that this was going on in my gut until now, that it's better. And they realized they were having a symptom they just weren't aware of. But the other patient that was really interesting, she came in with a host of autoimmune markers lighting up on her blood test, and she was having joint pains. She had I really dig deep because I was like, this has got to be like autoimmune, joint pains, and it wasn't Lyme disease, so there's got to be something gut related. No gut symptoms, gut is fine, bowel movements are fine. So I just tell her, you know what, I know that even though you have no gut symptoms, let's do some testing to see if there's anything going on there, because there could be connections between leaky gut and perhaps some pathogens in the gut that could cause the inflammation that you're feeling in your joints and the pain in the body. So we do that, and I am surprised but not surprised that she has yeast overgrowth and she has a parasite. And she had 0 gut symptoms. And yet she was colonized. So she had already read my book and was changing her diet. We tweaked it more, really removing sugars. And we put her on a treatment, which was, I think for her, was a combination of a non-absorbable medication, so one that stays in the gut, and some anti-candida or anti-yeast herbs. And within 2 months, her joint pains disappeared. Whereas before that, the doctor she was seeing was trying to put her on a biological to suppress the immune response and deal with her autoimmune condition. But where was the autoimmune condition coming from?
The gut.
So it was coming from the gut, from the inflammation in the gut, the leaky gut syndrome. So as we healed the gut, her other symptoms resolved, but she never had any gut symptoms to begin with. Which, there are just, I think that people have different levels of sensing or sensitivity, and it makes it a bit of a mystery, but I think it's almost fair to say that anybody who has an autoimmune disease, a skin disorder, an allergic condition, asthma, even migraines, neurologic conditions. We know there's a strong correlation between autism and gut disorders. So all of these cases, it's fair to assume that there is a gut problem, even if one doesn't appear to exist. Mm. And the healing needs to start through the foundation of the gut and building the foundation there. Unless if there is neuroinflammation, then we have the gut speaking to the brain and the brain speaking to the gut in both directions. And when there is inflammation in the brain, you also have to address the neuroinflammation at the same time that you're working on healing the gut.
Explain that for me. How would you do that?
How do you address the neuroinflammation? Yeah. So we might use some natural remedies. There is a spray that contains a ginseng analog that helps with neuroplasticity and reducing inflammation in the brain. So to get it directly to the brain, much faster delivery that way, but also with all different types of oils, phosphatidylcholine, things that help improve the nerve cell membrane so that communication can be easier between the nerves. And actually phosphatidylcholine is also very important for liver detoxification. So it even relates to gut health. So using different types of fats that are necessary in order to have healthy cell membranes.
Awesome, love it. So how would you take someone through an elimination diet? What's the best way to do that?
The elimination diet can be done as basically an all or none type of deal, where you take out the most reactive foods out there. Yeah. So for example, like in my program, it's wheat, gluten, dairy, soy, corn, peanuts. I do take out a lot of legumes because a lot of people get very gassy with legumes. And of course, anything that's GMO, genetically modified, trying to emphasize foods that are organic. If you do eat meat, pasture-raised, grass-fed, hormone-free, antibiotic-free. If you eat fish, wild-caught fish. But removing the most reactive foods for at least a period of, I like to say 6 weeks. I would say minimum is 4 weeks. And then you can do a reintroduction one by one. But in practicality, what I see is a lot of my patients come in, everybody's working, 12 hours a day, they're overwhelmed. So to tell them to eliminate 5 foods all at once, they're gonna be like, you're setting them up for failure. Like, I don't know where to begin. So another way that I do an elimination with patients is I kind of do a stepwise elimination. So I stack it in, starting with like dairy and gluten, because those are the two, I would say, top reactors. and asking the person, which one, do a food history, diet history, and see, okay, which one is easier? You're not really eating a lot of dairy, so do you think you could remove dairy first? And let's do that for 2 weeks. And let's get really good at identifying where there is dairy, like if you're eating out, like really starting to know, like ask about sauces, creams, and soups, like places where dairy might be hidden. Get confident and good at that, and then we'll add in the next one. So I do, for a lot of people, I do a more sequential elimination, and it's really about doing what's right for the person, and what works for them, because in the end you want to be successful. And if you know that you're going to get overwhelmed if you're trying to do too much all at once and you're not going to know what to eat, then you have to do it step by step, so you can kind of become an expert at avoiding dairy and then become an expert at avoiding the next food, but you keep avoiding dairy while you add in the next one that you're going to avoid as well. So those are different ways to do elimination. And then at the end of the elimination, some people I've had do eliminations and they feel so much better that they never go back and test. Some people want to test, or some people ask me, well, can I have this food on occasion? And what I explain there is, it depends on the level of healing and the time that has passed and all of the other work that we've done to heal the gut and improve the microbiome. But there's also a threshold issue. So you may be able to eat a food that you are sensitive to, but maybe only a small amount. And if you pass a certain threshold, you start to have some of the old symptoms come back. And I try to teach people how to do that because I want people to kind of be part of their own care, but also be able to make decisions for themselves, for their own health, without needing to ask me every time. So in the end, we want to make educated consumers that can take care of themselves and know what to do in different situations.
Brilliant, super wise, and I think that's a much more sustainable way to give people that information, not make it overwhelming. You take it how you will. I know myself, I thought I should get off dairy and gluten, and I actually attacked dairy first because cheese is my number one favorite food, and I'm like, if I can get off cheese, I can do anything. So yeah, and I honestly, getting off particularly gluten, I realized it's changed my life. I had so many, I was struggling with a lot of things I didn't realize I could overcome.
Yeah.
Brain fog and joint pain and all of it gone.
And that's so important to say, is that sometimes you don't know what the food is doing to you until you remove the food. But for anybody who's listening to this, one thing they need to realize is that the first 2 weeks when you remove the food, you might actually feel worse than you did when you were having it, as your body is going through a bit of withdrawal and your immune system is kind of getting activated during that period. So you have to kind of stick through that time. Drink lots of fluids, make sure that you're going to the bathroom regularly. Like all these things that are important for detoxification are really key when you're doing an elimination diet, because you have to support your body through the process of resolving the reactions. And then after 2 weeks is really when you can start to notice the difference, and you can see, like, I had the same experience with gluten. I would have this slump at 3 or 4 p.m. after if I went out for lunch and that day I ate a sandwich, I felt like I needed to go lie down and take a nap. Ever since I took gluten out, I have 12 hours of energy every day. I can go on till the end of the day at work, and my brain is sharp. So, and I love that I ended up with gluten sensitivity, because I can understand what my patients go through, but I also walk the walk of what I preach, and I'm living it myself, and I know what it takes. I know how difficult it can be, and yet how easy it can be. I always tell people that it's going to be as difficult as you want to make it, or as easy as you want to make it. And I think it's all about mental framing. So when I went and decided that I needed to take gluten out of my diet, I had many patients telling me, oh, this is so hard, I don't know how to figure this out. And I thought, well, I'm going to figure this out because I feel like I don't have much of a choice. And a blood test showed that I was reactive to gluten. And I just decided, you know what, this is going to be easy. And I think if we frame things as like, especially when you're making a choice for your health, that it's going to be easy, then it becomes easier. Because the other thing that happens with people with chronic disease is that they get stuck. And they're in this merry-go-round where the behaviors that they're doing are also the things that are keeping them sick. And they don't know how to get out of there, and they feel overwhelmed by everything. But they have to see what piece of it is that they're keeping themselves there and breaking out of an old pattern. You know, that's really, really important, because we can easily fall into a pattern with chronic disease where we live in the disease state. So as I take people through healing journeys, one of the things I tell them is that we want to start identifying with you as a healthy person. And we want to stop identifying with you as the sick person, the chronically ill person. You know, because I think that is so key, especially for someone who's had gut issues forever. It's like you start identifying with your illness and you start losing who you are within that. And it's so important to see that there is a piece of you that is not your body, that is not your illness, that is beyond that. And that is your essence. That is who you are. But that is also who you have to contact in order to heal. And you have to stop identifying with the disease. And it's not about, it's not about blame over the disease. It's just a place of empowerment that changes the script so that the person can heal.
I want to ask you now, so someone comes into your office, right, and they have issues, and you know that you want to treat their gut. What's the process that you take this person through? Like, do you go straight for the gut, or do you think, oh, maybe we'll try some other detox, or like, what do you do? What's your process?
If a person comes in and I think that their gut is at the root or the center of their issues, I probably start exploring. So a lot of what I do first is based on a very thorough history. And kind of, I think of like as myself as a functional medicine practitioner, that we're kind of detectives. And a lot of the people that I see come in and they've been to 5 other doctors and no one's figured out what's happened to them. So what I see, my job is to really understand the story very carefully and understand what worked and what didn't work. And sometimes what I tell people is that I'm also looking for the stones that were left unturned, looking for the hidden clues that someone else perhaps passed over or didn't think was significant. And sometimes people don't know, when they're speaking their history to you, what is significant. They might, just run over something, and that to me is like the gold. They just said something golden. I like to go back and ask them, before you got sick, what was going on in your life? Or was there a trigger? Was there something? Because there's always a wisdom to people about what happened at that time. Like, I had a patient here today and I was asking her that, and she was going through a very stressful period with her daughter. But she hadn't told me that before. Everything was about the physical and the symptoms and this, but they started at a very discrete time. So if symptoms start on June of 20-something, I want to know what was going on in your life right before that. because that's a hint as to what was the trigger that got you. So I spend a lot of time really getting down into the story of the patient and understanding the details, because the story can start to tell me a lot of things. They might say things in their story that already are letting me know that dairy doesn't agree with them, or that a certain food is not good. So I might already be leaving them, even though I'm going to do some blood tests. I may decide to do stool and urine testing, but I may already be giving them a certain set of instructions after the first meeting of ways that I want them to start changing the diet. I don't want to overwhelm the person. And usually the way I work is I was explaining this to someone the other day. Actually, I had a doctor shadowing me, and I realized that the way I work with people is, first we're working on the physical plane. We're working on, everybody comes in and they're focused on their symptoms. Very soon thereafter, and as quickly as they let me, I'm working on the mental plane, maybe the emotional plane, and understanding how is that affecting the symptoms. Because there's such a strong relationship between the gut and the nervous system and our level of agitation, internal agitation, and the balance between the sympathetic fight or flight part of the autonomic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. You have to be in parasympathetic relaxed state in order to heal. And a lot of the people that walk through my door with gut issues are not in the parasympathetic state. A lot of times they think it's because, they've been so focused on being sick, but I think it's usually much more global than that. It's the way that a lot of people react to and deal with stress. They amp up and they get agitated. So I start with the physical, and that might be through a number of appointments in the beginning, kind of really getting down to the nitty-gritty of the diet. And are there certain supplements, gut healing supplements that we should take? And is there anything else that, I try to get mindfulness in there as quickly as I can, but sometimes people really want to focus on the physical part, the very concrete. But as soon as I can, I start going into the stress part and the mindfulness and getting them to learn how to breathe and meditation. So I think that's so key and important in the healing process. And that probably comes from my background in yoga, and I did a yoga teacher training at one point, and I've been meditating for over 20 years. So, and then what I say is, so I start with the physical, the mental, and then lastly, for those that I can access that with, the spiritual as well. Because I really do believe to heal from chronic health issues, to heal deeply, you have to heal at all levels. So it's not just about like, oh, this is what I eat and these are the supplements I take. That's very concrete. That's not really getting the whole picture. It's about how do you live your life? How does stress affect you when you experience it? Where do you take it into your body? For example, I had a patient, I think 2 weeks ago, that came in, and she has Crohn's disease, which is an inflammatory bowel disease. And I've been working with her for over a year. And the amazing thing about working with patients with gut health issues is that it is an ongoing, it's a journey. I sometimes tell people this is an ultra marathon. This is not, we're not going to conquer this in one visit, because I want them to understand, let's set expectations that we're embarking on a quest. And if you stick to that quest, you're going to heal. You have to trust along the way, because there will be bad days and good days, and there will be setbacks. But the general direction that I want to see is a direction of improvement. So anyway, with this patient, she came in and we've been working on mindfulness and her understanding about how stress affects her. And I've been really trying to get her to make the connection between stress and her gut. And she told me, she had this epiphany that she realized that when she was under stress at school, that she tightens her abdomen. And she like contracts it rather than keep it relaxed. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. You know, what an amazing observation. That something that was not in your awareness now has come into your awareness. So then what do we do with that? We breathe. So I tell her, you know, so now I want you, when that happens, I want you to breathe into that spot and breathe relaxation into it, because then from taking it to awareness, then we need to have an action that helps resolve it, you know, and part of it is making the connections so that then we can release those patterns. So that's kind of the way that I work with people, and then figuring out, you know, because sometimes patients with gut issues might have trauma that come from earlier in life as well. So perhaps sexual abuse as a child, some other trauma that was a trigger for the gut issues. So those are those are the many levels, the way I see that I work with people. It's almost like a pyramid, and starting with the foundation and going up and getting more spiritual, metaphysical in the approach.
I love that. That's interesting that you share that story, because I actually do the same thing. When I'm stressed, I think I'm always kind of tensed. In the past I've been like, oh, it gives me abs. It's probably a bad thing, isn't it?
I used to do that myself as well. I would notice that I would get, whenever I was stressed, I would tighten up in right under my sternum. So this soft spot here, which is the solar plexus. And through work that I did with an energy healer over several years, I learned to dissociate that so that I wouldn't put my stress into my gut, and learning how to breathe and relax and almost like uncouple that connection. Because a lot of people that have gut issues, they probably at some point as a child learn to internalize their feelings rather than express them. So it could be that they felt angry, but they didn't have a safe way to express the anger, so the anger came inwards. Or there was conflict, and they didn't learn ways to negotiate the conflict outside of themselves and turned it inward. And a lot of people feel conflict in their GI system, or their upper GI.
Wow. So what's the solution there? So what would you recommend? Like, you know, obviously you're saying you're trying to touch all those different factors: spiritual, mindfulness, body.
Yeah.
So would you recommend someone on the path of gut healing would also see a therapist, like, to get that out? Or like, is there things that we can do personally?
That's a good question. I believe it depends on the skill and the awareness and the ability of the person, because some of it may be just to bring into awareness that there is an element of conflict, let's say, that's happening when they feel this. And let's use an example of they're at work and they feel that with their boss, but they never speak up. So part of the healing is to find a way to have a voice and to speak, to be able to tell, you know, their boss whatever is bothering them about the issue. So it starts coming into the place of boundaries. And I find it's very interesting because, you know, we started talking about leaky gut syndrome in the beginning, and that's our boundary to our gut and the food that comes through. So it's kind of like a very, very intimate internal boundary that a lot of people that have gut issues also don't know how to have boundaries with other people outside of them. So setting boundaries in terms of what you will and won't do with others. And this could be through working with a therapist. I'm very pro working with a life coach as well. And I've referred patients to a life coach over the years. And I also am very open to having patients that are of that mindset working with an energy healer, because as I learned working with my energy healer to create healthy boundaries, which then I found completed the healing of my gut that I had started through changing my diet and food and mindfulness and all that. But the final element was creating healthy boundaries.
I love that. Really insightful stuff. So, like, I'm actually not very familiar with energy healing. How does that work?
Oh, wow.
You know, just an overview. Like,
I just opened
that's
the cat in the hat. So for people who are probably, they probably think, oh, that's woo-woo or kind of crazy. Like, what does that mean? The person that I work with was trained in the Brennan School. Barbara Brennan was a scientist, a physicist that worked for NASA. And she was studying the magnetic field around planets and rocks and things. And she decided, I have this very sensitive equipment. Is there an energy field around humans? So let me check. And she did, and she found that, yeah, we have an energy field around us. Some people call it the aura. And she started working with it and learning more about it and teaching herself to the point where she started learning how to be a channel and help people heal.
Wow.
And so she created a school, which is quite an intense program because it takes 4 years to certify as an energy healer through the Brennan therapy. Other people probably know methods of healing like Reiki. Reiki is very generic in the sense the person is just becoming the channel and the energy is supposed to decide what to do. The difference that I see with Brennan therapy is that it's very precise. It's diagnostic, so the Brennan healer can look at your aura and see where your imbalances are. And then they go in and almost like a surgeon help fix that. And the great thing about the person that I've worked with over the years is that then she gives you homework that helps you continue the healing. So if and I guess going back to the beginning that the founder of the school was Barbara Brennan, who was a NASA scientist, a physicist. I feel like the place where we can understand energy is through quantum physics and understanding the interconnection between particles and things that are not close by can actually influence each other. So does that explain?
It really does.
Does that explain it?
Wow, can of worms.
It is a huge can of worms, and I feel like it's something that, as much as you can explain, the only best way to really know it is to actually experience it yourself. But it's almost like you can't experience it until you're ready for it, because you're not going to receive in the way that you need to receive unless you open yourself to receive. But it's almost like if you look at anybody's healing path, could you have healed before you were ready to heal or seek that? Would you have changed your diet when you weren't ready to do that? It has to be the right time is when the transformation happens.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating. I'm going to be Googling when I...
We could go on and on about this.
But I do want to get some breathing techniques. What can you suggest for people there?
Oh, I have 2 really great breathing techniques. One is called a vase breath. The vase breath is, so if you're sitting, you want to sit with your feet planted, or you can be in lotus style, sitting on the floor on a cushion. A lot of times it's easier to be on a cushion. And you breathe in as if you're filling your body with air, as if it was a vase. So the air is filling the bottom and going to the top. And then as you exhale, you do the opposite. You exhale from the top all the way to the bottom. And every time you breathe in, so you're breathing as if you're breathing all the way to your core. So your core is your pelvis. That's the bottom. That's what holds your digestive system. So if you can visualize as you're doing that, you're bringing energy all the way through your lower chakras. And then as you breathe out, you're exhaling negativity, whatever it is that you need to release. Sometimes I have people actually exhale with their mouth open and say ah, or like just feel like they're releasing stuff that is being held in. And this, you can set your timer and do this for 5 or 10 minutes. It's a very healing breath. It's very grounding, which is very important for people with gut issues, is to feel grounded.
So I'm sure a few people in our audience would be a bit uncomfortable with the word chakras and all that sort of stuff. Like, obviously, breathing is fine for any
well, look,
faith.
breathing is not specific to spirituality, and actually has been studied at Harvard many years ago. This is how I got into meditation and breathing, was through a book called The Relaxation Response by Dr. Herbert Benson. And the reason that I trusted it when I was right before I went to medical school is because I thought, okay, he's a Harvard doctor. He's done research on this. They've actually measured people's blood pressure, heart rates, and shown that the blood pressure came down, that their markers of anxiety actually reduce. So when I first got into breathing was because I was a very type A anxious person, and I was looking for a way to help myself calm down, and I wanted to do it without medication. So yeah, you don't have to believe in energy, you don't have to believe in anything. Like, you could just sit and breathe. And if you do this breath for 10 minutes, I mean, I guarantee you'll feel like you've shifted something.
That's amazing.
And it's really about shifting you into the parasympathetic state. The other breath that I learned, that I will say quickly, is a breath that involves breath holding. And it can be done in different degrees. The goal is to get to 5, 5, 10, 5. So 5-second inhale, 5-second hold, 10-second exhale. So the exhale is twice as long as the inhale. 5-second hold. And then inhale 5 seconds. So it keeps repeating. And it's 5, 5, 10, 5, or it can be 3, 3, 6, 3, and then you work your way up. And it's the great thing about this is that you don't necessarily have to clear your mind, because you could just be thinking about counting the breath and counting the breath holds, and just set your timer to 5 minutes. You know, a lot of people tell me that, oh, I'm no good at meditation, I can't do this, but anybody can sit and follow a breath pattern. You know, that's really easy to do. And that engages and turns on the parasympathetic nervous system. As we talked about in the beginning, you need to relax to heal. You need to be in a parasympathetic state in order to allow your body to heal. And that is one of my big goals when I'm working with patients, is to get them into that more relaxed state so that their bodies can heal and their gut can heal.
Love it. Super helpful. I really love it when experts can bring it into real practical ways to do things. So thank you so much. So obviously diet is super important to repair the gut, lowering stress, getting into that mindful state, or getting into the parasympathetic state, all important. What supplements do you use in your practice to help people with their gut repair as well?
There are certain supplements that I would say are the top gut healing supplements that I use. They include probiotics, prebiotic nutrients, Although with prebiotics, we have to be careful because too much of them too soon can cause gas and bloating. So we don't want to do that. Omega-3 fatty acids, very important to lower inflammation. L-glutamine, or combinations, powders that have L-glutamine, aloe, and DGL, which is a form of licorice, which is anti-inflammatory for the mucosa. And L-glutamine is the primary energy source for the cells that line the small intestine. So when you give the cells their preferred energy source, it makes the cells function better and they can heal. So they've found over studies that L-glutamine can help reverse the leakiness of the gut. So it heals leaky gut. The other nutrients that, or the other things I might use are, depending on the patient and their preferences, collagen powder. I might also use colostrum from grass-fed cows, or I might use a new thing that I've gotten into using, especially with patients with inflammatory bowel disease, is something that's called serum-derived bovine immunoglobulins. And they're pretty amazing because they're kind of like colostrum, but for someone who might have a dairy sensitivity that can't take colostrum or IgG from colostrum, which is antibodies. They help modulate the immune response and they help heal the gut lining. So I'm trying to basically address the gut microbiome issues and the intestinal lining through these things. Another, some other nutrients, well, I mentioned prebiotics, so like fructooligosaccharides, inulin, things like that, that help increase the presence of good bacteria in the gut. But you have to be careful not to use it too soon if you suspect that there's a lot of pathogens in, because you could be feeding the bad bugs as well. I'm also a big fan of bioflavonoids like quercetin, because quercetin stabilizes mast cells. A lot of people with gut issues might have hyperactive mast cells that release histamine, and thus you get the skin reactions and the hives and things like that. So quercetin is great for that, but turns out that quercetin also acts as a prebiotic for certain bacteria that help regulate body weight and insulin response and blood glucose. So that's the connection between the gut and diabetes and normal weight. So these are some of the top nutrients that I use. I might also use magnesium, like a magnesium citrate for a patient that has constipation. I might also use Cape aloe, also works really well for that. So always looking for natural means. And if the person has some sort of dysbiosis or imbalance of bad bacteria or yeast overgrowth, I might incorporate other supplements that have combinations of herbs like pau d'arco, maybe rosemary oil or oregano oil, thyme oil, other antimicrobials like berberine. So depending on what it is that I need to treat, I might incorporate some other herbals in there as part of the supplements. And those are not for long term, so I rotate people through different protocols as they heal, and keep some things they have to take for longer, like L-glutamine they might take for several months as we're doing gut healing through elimination diet and all that. So the supplements I look at as they are a complement to everything else that we do. You can't do one piece of it by itself and expect to get all the results you want. You have to do every piece together.
Awesome. Love it. Back on yoga and breathing for a second, I remembered I didn't ask you. Do you know of any studies connecting the benefit of breathing and yoga, etc., to gut health and overall health? Yeah.
I mean, we know that breathing in yoga has been shown to improve asthma. It can lower anxiety. And given that a lot of gut conditions are connected to stress and anxiety, or they're either Not that they are caused by them, but that they are aggravated by them. That anything that I can do to get the person to relax their body, relax their system, is going to improve their gut health. But also, when patients do something like go to a yoga class, and you come out of that yoga class feeling great, you're not going to leave the yoga class and go eat a hamburger and french fries. So your body is already kind of like, you've changed the internal state of your body. So your body is going to ask for healthier food. And I know that used to happen to me when I did yoga very regularly when I was younger. And I would come out of yoga class and I had to eat plants, vegetables, hummus, like everything, really clean stuff. So I think it helps also, it lowers your stress, but also helps you make better decisions about what you're going to eat. But I think that's the connection with that. And we know there are certain yoga poses like forward bends, things that help massage the internal organs that can help, or twisting poses that help with constipation as well.
Brilliant. Love it. Thank you.
I don't know if people explain this, but it's something really fascinating, I think, and interesting about the connection between our gut and our gut microbiome and brain health is that from the fibers that we eat in our diet feed a certain group of bacteria in our gut that are called butyrate producers. And butyrate is a molecule that is what we call short-chain fatty acid. Butyrate is the primary energy source of the colon cells, the colonocytes. So as I was talking about L-glutamine, butyrate is the equivalent of L-glutamine, except we can't get it directly through the diet. We get it through our microbiome, which is yet one reason that we need a very healthy microbiome, gut microbiome. But what's really remarkable about butyrate is that it also is an anti-inflammatory. And it's able to get into the bloodstream and it crosses the blood-brain barrier. And in the brain, it's a histone acetylase blocker. And by doing that, it increases transcription of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So in order to translate that into English, what I'm saying is that butyrate that's produced by gut bacteria increase your ability to learn and remember and form memories. So it's basically controlling the plasticity of our brain. And thus, I think that's a connection that a lot of people don't talk about when we talk about the gut-brain connection, is this very important connection between this byproduct of microbial metabolism that is necessary for our brain to be healthy and to be able to learn. And neuroplasticity, as we know, goes on throughout life. It doesn't end when you're a child. And I think a lot of it depends on the health of the gut.
I've heard, correct me if I say this wrong, brain-derived
neurotrophic factor.
Yeah. I've heard it described as being like fertilizer for the brain. Would that be an appropriate description?
So what brain-derived neurotrophic factor does is it stimulates new neural connections. So in a sense, you're right to say that it is like fertilizer for the brain because it's telling the cells to send out a connection this way, that way. And we know, for example, that in the brain of an Alzheimer's patient, the brain goes into reserve. The brain is trying to protect itself and it starts to withdraw connections. So we lose connections, and the same thing happens with dementia or as the brain ages and there's memory loss. So anything that can stimulate BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and help improve connections in the brain is golden. You know, for anyone who is aging, fiber is really important.
Wow. And it's quite a few steps in between fiber and improving.
And to understand like eating your greens and your different fibers like ground flaxseed and chia and whatnot, that is going to help your brain. So it's not just having omega-3s and whatnot. We need those short chain fatty acids for a healthy brain.
Wow. So for our audiences, like, I'd love for you to just briefly explain neuroplasticity, because I know a lot of people think that you are stuck with the brain you're born with. Like they're not aware that science is now saying, actually, no, we can change our brain. Can you talk to that for a moment?
Yeah, so the old idea was that the brain, you developed all the neural connections that you did as a child, and as the brain aged, you lost them. And there was no ability to form new ones. And what we know now is that through different means, whether it's exercise, healthy diet, brain challenging activities, that you can actually still re-engage and create new neural connections. This is what we call neuroplasticity. So it's not that the brain is this solid mold that doesn't change itself. The brain is actually actively, constantly changing itself. And I do believe that you can show an old dog new tricks. It's just that the old dog needs to eat right and get plenty of fiber and get healthy omega-3 fats. And you want to make sure that their gut is not inflamed, because when you have a leaky gut, you have a leaky blood-brain barrier. And that's the barrier that protects your brain from all the different chemicals, toxins that you might be exposed to just by living on this planet.
Can you explain to me leaky gut, leaky brain? Like,
yes.
What does that mean?
So as your gut becomes leaky, we go back to, I was talking about endotoxemia. Endotoxin comes in, stimulates your immune system. Your immune system releases all sorts of cytokines, inflammatory messengers that tell your body it's inflamed. Well, part of that causes the blood-brain barrier, which protects the circulation of the brain, to open up and become leakier. So you get endotoxin into the brain, and then you start getting a brain, we call it a brain on fire. So fire in the gut causes a fire in the brain. And a brain on fire, for example, could be an anxious brain or could be a depressed brain. And again, where is the problem? Is the problem in the brain or is it in the gut? The problem started in the gut. And the gut needs to heal in order to start putting out the fire in the brain. I think the big problem today is that we've lost connection with ourselves, and in turn lost connection with the earth and where our food comes from. And we need to reconnect with where our food comes from and eating not packaged foods, not things that are processed, but eating the real foods that come from the earth, which are healthy for the gut and healthy for our bodies. I think that's it's as simple as in all the complexity of the choices, it really is very simple. Go to the produce section of the supermarket and bypass all the other areas until the very end. But really, the majority of your grocery dollars should be spent buying things that come from the earth and choosing foods that are organic if possible. But really, it's about reconnecting where food comes from, because it's become so depersonalized that people don't know how to heal because they don't even know what to eat.